Historically, a segment of Liberia's population, commonly called the country people, saw themselves as marginalized by a group they identified as the Congo or the Congo people or Americo Liberians. These so called Congo people, widely regarded as the ruling elite, were generally educated and had the exposure needed to manage the country's affairs. Contrary to popular belief, this group did not consist exclusively of formerly enslaved people from America. It also included anyone who had the qualifications and experience required to assume leadership roles in government. Over years of perceived marginalization, the country people united against what they saw as a common adversary, the privileged ruling class who held influential positions as educated public servants and affluent leaders. This collective resentment intensified, fueled by a movement led by another group, the so-called progressives, who organized protests against the regime they labeled as the Congo establishment. This widespread dissatisfaction culminated into the 1980 coup, a violent upheaval that resulted in the execution of several high-ranking officials, including President William R. Tolbert, widely regarded as one of Liberia's most qualified leaders, and members of what many consider the most competent cabinet in a country's history. Whether the coup was orchestrated by the progressives, by Samuel Doe, a junior officer in the armed forces of Liberia, or by foreign powers seeking to depose an uncooperative client state, remains a subject of historical debate. So when the previously marginalized country people assumed governmental control after 1980, without the oversight and standards previously enforced by the former establishment, a culture of complacency and mediocrity emerged. The erosion of accountability, fostered by an environment in which ethnocentrism, transactional politics, and vote buying became routine. An uninformed electorate, pervasive corruption, and unchecked legislative power have produced inefficiency and stagnation. The system of checks and balances has effectively collapsed, as those responsible for limiting executive overreach are themselves implicated in waste, fraud, and incompetence. Over the past 46 years, the Liberian government has become the proverbial elephant meat, with political parties simply waiting for their turn to distribute the nation's resources among themselves. This is the same system that gave rise to the likes of Yeke Koluba, a former combatant with minimal formal education and political exposure who ascended to the national legislature with little regard for decorum or formalities. Yet, unlike many of his colleagues, Yeke appears genuinely passionate about advocating for the plight of ordinary citizens, calling out his peers for improprieties and challenging them to do the right thing for their constituents. For instance, he recently criticized the government for evicting vulnerable citizens from land in Monrovia that authorities claimed belonged to the armed forces of Liberia. Like most well-intentioned Liberians, Yeke condemned President Bouakai for his insensitive remarks during the demolition of homes and businesses built by struggling citizens in a country where nearly all economic activity is centralized in a capital that was originally built to accommodate fewer than 500,000 residents. Rather than addressing the underlying causes of overcrowding, such as the lack of economic opportunities and basic social services, including functioning schools and healthcare facilities. In other parts of the country, the government evicted those citizens without any resettlement plan or even a clear, immediate plan to develop the so-called army land. To further escalate his dispute with the government, Yeke sarcastically stated that since God is not going to produce new land for the Republic of Guinea, they have the right to annex parts of Liberia as their own, echoing President Boaka's insensitive remark during the eviction of squatters on AFL land in Monrovia when he said, in the presence of crying squatters, that God was not coming to make new land. The land was for the AFL, and squatters should vacate immediately. Yeke's statement has prompted public outrage and calls for his impeachment, as many see him as unpatriotic. Many of his colleagues in the legislature are even leading the campaign to impeach him. I jokingly told a colleague recently that Yeke is lesser of many evils in our grossly inept legislature. This observation is shared by our current information minister, Mr. Jerry Limick Pia, whom I greatly admire and has described Yeke as a dedicated national leader. Although he may not exhibit the conventional demeanor of a traditional politician, Yeke's commitment to holding power accountable and representing his constituents is evident. While his approach and rhetoric may lack refinement, he is widely regarded as one of the most patriotic elected officials in recent Liberian history. Once again, I must ask, where is the collective outrage among Liberians when after 46 years, the nation still lacks access to safe drinking water and reliable electricity? Where is the unified anger as long-standing officials continue to circulate through the government, one regime after another, while millions of children succumb to preventable diseases such as cholera, malaria, typhoid? Why is there no widespread protest against the persistent waste management crisis in the capital or the critical condition of hospitals, which lack even the most basic resources to provide adequate care? Instead of focusing on the foolish idea of impeaching Mr. Koluba for his sarcastic remark or his sarcastic statement, our collective anger should be directed at the current Liberian government for its failure to defend our country's territory and sovereignty. Not only did the government fail to secure the border, but its lackadaisical approach to managing the crisis and informing the public about the root causes of the Guinean encroachment is unacceptable and, in my opinion, treasonous. I fully agree with Councillor Tiawon Gonglo's call for the impeachment of the president if he does not take decisive action to investigate and prosecute the alleged illegal mining of minerals within the disputed Makona River, which sparked the crisis. Why aren't our newspapers and media in general highlighting this story and demanding answers from the government? Why is so much of the media falling for the government's diversionary tactic of vilifying Mr. Koluba for simply making a statement, instead of focusing on the government's ineptitude in performing its primary duty of defending our sovereignty? Liberia cannot afford to continue circling the same drain of complacency, selective outrage, and manufactured distractions. A nation that tolerates leaders who trample its sovereignty, abandon its poor, and weaponize ethnicity for political gain is a nation that consents to its own degradation. We have watched generations of politicians enrich themselves while children die from dirty water, hospitals decay, trash consumes our capital, and promises of reform evaporate the moment officials assume office. Yet, we reserve our loudest anger not for these systemic betrayals, but for a lone legislator's sarcasm. This inversion of priorities is not an accident. It is a tactic. So long as we argue over personalities and sound bites, we will never hold accountable those who quietly auction off our land, our minerals, and our future. So long as we allow ourselves to be distracted by impeachment theatrics, we will never build the genuine rule of law, the strong institutions, and the national cohesion that Liberia so desperately needs. The time has come for Liberians, whether from the so-called Congo establishment, the country people, or any other imagined divide, to recognize that our true enemy is not one another, but the entrenched culture of impunity and mediocrity that has captured our state. We must demand transparency about our borders and natural resources with the same ferocity that we demand apologies for offensive remarks. We must insist that the lives and dignity of ordinary citizens carry more weight than the egos of politicians. Breaking this cycle will not be achieved by one man's impeachment or another's election. It will require a sustained, informed, and united citizenry that refuses to be fooled, refuses to be bought, and refuses to be silent. Liberia's future will not be decided by the loudest insult on the radio or the harshest quote in the newspaper, but by whether its people finally choose collective action over collective amnesia. If we fail to act now, if we once again allow this moment to pass in a haze of gossip and political theater, we will have no one to blame but ourselves when the next generation asks why they inherited a broken state. But if we choose courage over convenience and solidarity over cynicism, we can still transform this wounded republic into a nation that protects its land, serves its people, and honors the sacrifices of those who believed Liberia could be more than an elephant meat. The choice, at last, is ours.